Was everybody here? Is there anyone that wasn't at yesterday's session?
Whether you were here or not, irrelevant at this point because you're here now.
Because you're here now. But I want to know how much stuff to re-go over. Sounds like zip.
Yeah,
Perfect.
So we're going to go pretty fast. There's just from a scheduling reason, we ended up having 2 sessions. So rather than repeating everything from yesterday, you're going to just do a very quick high level of the open items for discussion related to UPI. Mark's going to show the updated UPI builder that he literally built this afternoon. Give a few examples, and really what we want is feedback from you guys in terms of what you think about the item for discussion, if you've got any things specific to markets you're familiar with, data you're familiar with, et cetera. So since we did this yesterday, we're going to go through this really quick. Mark, if you're going to let's get down to those 3 items.
This is the thing that got updated. You guys will appreciate it. It's very interactive.
Quick background. I don't think that's necessary.
You guys remember phone numbers versus parcel numbers? Great. Here's some of the pending updates that we have right here. These were already really kind of voted on, but they were pushed out because we don't want to have lots and lots of UPIs out there. So these are some things that we're planning, like the zeros. Like
yeah, so if you go back 1 second, Mark. So there's really 3 things, and the builder that we'll show in just a moment shows this quite clearly with the data. Of the 3, this is the most straightforward. This is really just a standard issue in the sense of replacing sub-county when it doesn't exist. Instead of having an N for no, we'll replace it with 5 zeros just for consistency.
Consistency with the ANSI FIPS
standard.
organization that actually owns that particular standard.
The next one's a little more complicated. Went over this yesterday, so for those of you that were here, I won't bore you again. If you weren't here, it's very simplistic. It's do we or do we not want to keep the formatting as maintained by the county, or do we want to remove that formatting? On paper, that seems like it would be fairly simplistic, but it's kind of a pull and tug between uniqueness and universality. And so there's not really one solution that's going to fix all problems. I think we're leaning toward more keeping that formatting, especially based on some of the work that CoreLogic and ICE, and if you're not familiar with ICE, that's what Black Knight is now. So they've got 2 national data sets. They did a lot of work on that. So I think we are leaning toward keeping that formatting.
Or we might go somewhere in between. This is going to be the hot discussion in the work group. And again, anyone that's got any feelings, you'll probably want to come. But certainly we might say, hey, dashes stay, but spaces go, or right. We'll have to do some analysis and come up with a rule set that really makes sense because, as Matt was mentioning, the universality is important, and if there's spaces that are arbitrarily put in there or inconsistently in there, things like that, we just want to be careful that we're doing it well. Right. Whatever well means, that's what we want to make sure that we're going to determine that. So
yeah, that's our very highly subjective goal.
Well.
That's right.
Because 99.8%, that's pretty good. It's not well. No, kidding. Okay, and then this is the other one that we're talking about is the URN encoding that we've been talking about already, and how it pans out. How this actually parses out is also the subject for the longer term. I think the longer term vision for the work group is that what we're going to put together is this for the reasons we talked about yesterday, which is sort of that keep things sort of very similar in the RESO namespace. I think that's got a lot of value. Okay, so we're going to switch over to the live part of this. Hopefully the demo gods are with me today. Is it visible to people? Okay, cool, awesome. So this is what, kind of put together quickly so we can kind of illustrate. So this is a tool that's available. Actually, it's available already. It's published already. I'll give you the URL in a little bit, and you guys can play with it yourselves. Just really quick, I'm going to go through it so you can pick your state. I'm going to pick Arizona. That's my favorite state. And this is my favorite county. And you'll see right here, it says NA. NA. That's because in Maricopa County, they don't delegate townships, right? It's a county, they own it, goodbye. So that's what we respect. And this is documented in the ANSI FIPS, which counties, or which sub-pieces of a county have that authority delegated to you. Matt's going to talk to you in a few minutes about one that doesn't play so nice that we still have to deal with. And then I'm going to put a property number in here, and I'm going to throw in the dashes to kind of illustrate what we are really referring to here. So here's a kind of a fake parcel. And you can see, and I have all these different mechanisms. The UPI 1.0, that's the one that's in release today. That's the one that everyone uses. Oh, I have a little bug there because it says subproperty. I apologize for that. Damn it. Oh, well, the way it goes.
That's what you get when you do it an hour before.
That's what you get when you're doing it during another presentation, when you should be listening. And then I have the planned update. So the planned update, so just really quick, I'm going to go through this actually, just to make it easy. So this part right here is part of what's changing. This is the county that was up there. This is the N, meaning there was no sub-county. It's all zeros in the new model, but originally it was this way. We have R because that's real property. We have the stripped out dashes, and there really shouldn't be anything here because there's no sub-property that I'm identifying here. Normally I can go here and I can identify different other things besides real property. And this is how it gets, in the model we were already kind of planning on doing, except I'm lying a little bit because this part is where we keep those dashes, right? We don't get rid of them. Normally those were all pushed together. But you can see this is all one big thing with the zeros. The CoreLogic guys said, hey, let's make sure we separate these guys out. So this one looks exactly like today, with the only exception being that these dashes are inserted in there. The 122-888-009, you can see that wasn't there before. So that's the only difference on that aspect. Then we have, there's two this side. No, these aren't. So then we have the zeros. The zeros are plugged in. That's currently what we have in place. And then this is what we've been talking about, the URN. That's what that might look like. This is up for grabs right now. These are the discussion points in the group to kind of refine what these things are. So I'm going to let Matt play with the tool a little bit and show you his take on it.
Let's see.
And I get to sit down like yesterday. You got to sit down.
Okay. I'm in that glasses dilemma. I can see one or the other, but not both. So like Mark said, I'm just going to give you a different example just to make a couple different points. As he mentioned, in Maricopa County, which is essentially Phoenix, if you don't know that area, so one of the counties in Arizona, they don't do sub-counties there. Connecticut is always a good sample state for problem data. And so Fairfield County, and one thing, if you've never seen this UPI builder, it's very nice because when Mark built it, on the back end, he's already pre-popped all the states, counties, and sub-counties. So if you go into Fairfield, so each one of these entities has the ability to create parcels or property, And so we'll just pick one, Shelton. This is actually a true property. 19 Applewood Drive. Owner is Brian Casey. I assume he's some distant relative of mine, although I've never met him. But anyway, so a few things that are different here than what Mark showed. Really, they aren't different because that's the whole point of the standard. But you can just see from a enumeration standpoint or encoding standpoint, some of those better differences. So where right now in Maricopa, we had the N versus the 5 zeros. Since this is an area with townships, you've got that township, which is 68170. So you can just see the variations within the UPI and the different options we're looking at. The other point that I wanted to make is at that parcel number level, if you go to the township's website, that's how they have it, 122-61. How we would have it by default now is we remove that space. I looked at a couple different data providers, including CRS and the Workgroup, which is not actively involved in RESO, but an old school data group out of New England. And they have M122-L61 for map 122, lot 61. So that just kind of speaks to that. It's essentially 122-61, 122-61 without a space, M122-L61. If that's the only record you had to look at and you're looking at it as an individual, that's very discernible. If it's one of 150 million and your computer's looking at it, your match rate's going to be 0. And so that's really that issue we're trying to get at the parcel level and forcing, or trying to force or encourage as high of a match rate as possible. And one thing that I'm hoping we can do in the very near term, let me back up one second. One thing that's unique about UPI compared to a lot of things with RESO is we're dealing with public record data. And I don't mean holistically RESO, but if you think about data dictionary, the main data set they're concerned with is listings. All of you in this room are probably very involved with listings, creating them, maintaining them, shipping them, et cetera. And so one of the frustrations is, we've got all these different realtors that are inputting listings into different systems, et cetera. So it is anything but standard, but at least it's somewhat controlled. You can build rules around it, et cetera. Whereas UPI, the parcel is from 3,145 different counties for which we have no control over whatsoever. So that in and of itself is the challenge.
So think of 3,100, or was it 3,145 counties, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think the data dictionary group is phenomenal. It's so phenomenal that we're talking on stage about the minutia of a pickleball court, right? That tells you how really mature the data dictionary has gotten over the years. I think my first one of these was like 2014 or something. It's really gotten really well. But they deal with MLSs, and there's now how many? Like 500. 3,145 possible combinations for different ways to do things on these numbering. And as some people brought up earlier, occasionally someone will get elected to that county and change it. Just decide, you know what, I don't like that dash there, let's move them all together. Who knows? We, as RESO, we don't get to go, hey, Maricopa County, you're doing this in a screwed up way, we want you to do it this way. This is the RESO way, please do it that way. They're not gonna really listen. So we don't, that's what Matt's really talking about when he's saying, this is a very imperfect problem and that we have no control over fixing, but we're going to fix it. We did actually, I think, have done a really good job so far of trying to handle what that is, but no solution is 1,000%.
Right, and the point I was trying to make and got myself derailed when we got stuck on the number of how many counties is that unlike listings are constantly generated. And parcels are generated as well, but if you think of it at a national level, there's about 150 million properties are uniquely, have a parcel number. So you're not dealing with this avalanche of new data all the time. And the reason I say that is although it's data we don't control, there are data vendors, two of the larger ones being ICE and CoreLogic, that have that data set. And so I think kind of our next step is, this is not an academic exercise. We can actually compare, get a small sample of records from every county and say, do you have this, do you have this? And what does that match rate? I think at a gut level, really just, and Mark and I have talked about this, I do think when we talk about the 99.8%, we're talking about records that are unique if you strip that formatting. But I think if you talk about just matching, I'm thinking probably 85 to 90% of the counties, if you look at data vendor A and data vendor B, they're going to match by default. So I think we're talking about a small percentage, but it's an exercise worth doing. So what I would really propose is that we do that comparison, and then that also will help facilitate the idea of a UPI registry, or if you don't think of it as like metadata. So in very simplistic terms, think of a spreadsheet that says county name, FIPS code, sub-county, here's the parcel ID, what's the source of that, and how's it formatted? And you just have to do that 3,145 times.
Well, you don't have quite do it that many times. There's a lot of counties that are very well behaved, like Maricopa County that we talked about. That's what we like to call it the sunny day case. It's also the sunny day state, I guess. But it's the case that's kind of easy because they're just doing it this way, and it's state mandated, and they don't change it. But as we pointed out, there are places that do change, and that's where things like the registry come into play. And there's lots of natural cases where parcel numbers might change. And we just want to make sure that our standard is covered by these other mechanisms. So here's what we really wanted to do, actually, and we're about halfway through. The main reason that Matt and I wanted to talk about this and put this data out in front of people, give people the bad news, or sort of, the rough news yesterday, and then today talk about, hey, these are the potential solutions. Really want to hear from you guys, right? I want to have the discussion. I want to hear people say, that sucks. That's great. Or maybe there's a new idea, or maybe there's a new problem. I hope not, but there might be. So if people that they want to go to the mic and say what they feel, if we said, for example, yeah, we're going to do these 5 UPIs, you guys get to pick. What would you say? What would be that? Maybe someone says, whatever you do, don't do 5 UPIs, please. 1 UPI, and that would be me at the mic, but we are going to have to make a change and potentially 2 changes. But I really want to know what you guys think, so let's start out.
So I see a lot of potential with the UPI, and distributed ledger is going to definitely use this, I believe. But I was wondering if there's any considerations towards dwelling units on the property, like a garage apartment, multiple dwelling units in a house. I know you address condos, but I was curious what you do beyond that.
So I'm so glad you said that, because one of the things we didn't talk about was what happens. This is kind of an open enumeration in DD speak. We have these types of other things besides real property. Real property meaning there's a tax ID associated with this thing. There's a tax account. It's real property that can be transacted in the eyes of the government. A stock co-op, for example, apartment. Maybe this is a building and there's apartments inside of it, and maybe there's this is the parcel number, and then maybe there's an apartment number that's 123. This is what that would look like. And this is today, except where it says subproperty. I'm so sorry that I screwed that up. But anyway, it basically just says S and then the number. So forget that says subproperty, just assume it says S, and those are dashes. But the point is, that's how it gets addressed. There's a little bit of difference I don't want to necessarily take up everyone's time with here. I never liked this S being in the middle, and we've talked about that in the group, so we have some extensibility changes that we're talking about. Those will also be happening in the group, but to answer your question, that is actually something that is considered in the UPI. You can have a boat slip, and we talked about all the different kinds of things that could be underneath the property, and that's an example. Parking spaces.
Right.
You can put a parking space here. So, is that cool? Next question?
Yeah, I don't see it on this screen, but I saw it on a previous slide, and I see it in the spec on GitHub, where you have property type and property subtype. What thinking went into that, and does that make it harder to match up like historical records if it's a certain property type in one MLS and a slightly differently named property type in a different MLS? So
property type and property subtype aren't really in the UPI. We talk about this is the type of property we're trying to represent. So real property is real property. That means, like I pointed out, there's a traceability to a government document that says you got an account. For us in the UPI, as opposed to data dictionary subtype is a different animal. Here we say subtype or property subtype. We're talking about property that can be bought, sold, rented, listed, okay, for all practical purposes, underneath this other property. So for example, I try to kind of illustrate it here. Let's say you're in New York, and the only taxable entity is this building. There's like 1,000 apartments in that building. We don't count the apartments as being something under the real property definition, right? So they would be the sub-property of an apartment. And then you can list and say, hey, this is that building number, that building. Then you can there's actually a sub piece called building if you want to represent the building on the property, right? That looks like a B. And it has it has S0 through S9999, or maybe 3 nines, 999. And those are the apartments inside. And that's how we handle it. So our sub-property, I'm really glad you actually brought that up, because sub-property here is not data dictionary sub-property.
Okay, I really like the idea of UPI, and we try to implement it in our system. But thinking about the international expansion of RESO, I think we are going to run into a lot of problems in other countries because maybe they use a different system. We talked about hashing, but in general, I have the idea that if we are talking about identification that we can rely on in the industry. It shouldn't be something that is changed every day based on, if a tax authority decides to change the parcel number or whatever. So why not going beyond that and have a registry in RESO about the property, the UPI, keep this system, but we tie it to internal identification, and if something changes, we can trace that change. Like, for example, in those who are in IT know that DNS service does the same. So you type in a domain name today, maybe it's loaded on this IP address, tomorrow is a different server. So the DNS registry always routes you to the right server. So I think we need a backbone offered by RESO rather than relying on something that we don't have any control over.
Something we don't have any control over. So the registry that we talked about, that was proposed to RESO, and they're, at the time, I think they were going to possibly take that on, but I think since then they're like, well, maybe we'll job that out. But yes, the answer is yeah, that's a RESO controlled resource, and you feel please, come if you have other ideas, you can come to the work group around something that's a proprietary ID, which part of our objective when we first got into this was that, look, we don't want proprietary IDs. We want to have a standards-based identifier so someone can get the information that's publicly available and generate the UPI. They could contract with a property group or someone like CRS and get the UPI that way. So we shunned away from any kind of proprietary ID because, by the way, for everyone that has property data, they have an ID. Zillow's got an ID, Black Knight's got an ID, and they will always have that, right? CoreLogic has an ID. They need to have that ID. What we're doing is making it transportable, saying, well, if they have their ID, which they might have lots of things attached to data-wise, we just want a way for a translation, if you will. So the registry handles that, changing properties and changing parcel IDs, that kind of thing, by introducing a mechanism that says, hey, I have some information about this property ID, this UPI. That might be an insurance claim. That could be another property ID. And that's how we handle the sort of legacy of how the history of a particular property and how it might have changed. And so you make a single call to this to the UPI registry, and it tells you that. It tells you everything. It can tell you whatever is there. I did speak at the EU on this whole idea, and they all came to me and said, this is perfect. Now, they don't have parcel number and county, and they don't call them those things. Canada doesn't necessarily call them these things too. They have FIPS, strangely enough, but they call things provinces, and they have just a different kind of hierarchy, but they have a hierarchy. And so we don't want to be opinionated about a different country's hierarchy, but if they have one, this works. If they don't have one, they can really do whatever they want. There's nothing in this spec that says what Canada has to do or what Germany has to do, but that resonated with them. They loved it. They thought this was great. So I don't feel like there's a lot of, it's like a completely diversion of the way things are done, but it is done a little bit differently, and those do need to be documented, and that's part of what we're doing with the people, our friends in Canada who are on the work group, and we're devising up what an UPI would look like for them.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Question?
Sam.
Sam, do you have a question, or should I just?
I was just going to follow up quickly on Giselle's
sure.
point, because it's a good point. It's a very edge corner case where APNs or parcel numbers are being changed, but it exists. We found that it exists. So that's the idea of the registry, is you could tombstone a record but point it to where the new one is, and you'd have that historical information potentially. Who knows how that gets implemented? We don't usually try to build production products at RESO that everyone in the industry is going to need 24/7 uptime on. Could we? Sure. Would we need resources? Yes. to do that. So it's a great idea. And if there are organizations that want to commit to being a part of that process and building a registry to do this, let's have that discussion. We would love to. But we're well aware of what the value would be, but it's not a priority in terms of resources right now.
On an implementation model, is right, Sam?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. UPI is a priority, but building a registry is a whole different story than just building a specification.
And incidentally, just to dovetail a little bit off of the end of what Sam said, the UPI registry functions in multiple ways. And one key way that may not be apparent to everybody at the very beginning of saying, I've got these facts associated with this particular UPI, it does a few things. One, it supplies consensus, right? Now you can have consensus on a UPI from multiple sources. If there's a lot of facts associated with this particular UPI, you can have kind of a lot of confidence that that's the UPI. If there isn't anything, maybe somebody did a coding problem wrong and their data is, no data will be found. The second really important thing is it functions like a marketplace. So this is where people, right, companies, can actually advertise that we've got data for this property. Maybe my deal is I track insurance claims, for hazard insurance or hail or whatever damages, and I have all this data, and I know what properties they go with. I can upload that into the registry. Now, I don't provide the data. I don't provide the claims. I just say, hey, I got claims. If you're interested, call me. Or get a data feed from me or whatever, right? That's still between the consumer and the provider. We don't get in the way. All we do is it's like an advertisement that I've got some data. So from the marketplace angle is actually pretty big, and it's a little understated when we talk about it in the context of how a parcel came to be and things like that. It's very important there, but it has these other valid uses that I think are probably, from a company perspective, they might even eclipse the value of the other mechanism. Question.
Quick question about the percentages that you put up there. Do you know what data set that was run against? Is it run against so the 99.8% non-collision that you have, or whatever it is, right? Is that run against, do you know that was run against assessor records? Or
It is. It's assessment records.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Because looking at, you just kind of, we talked about it briefly, but you said parcel number 122 space 61, right? I feel like locally you could have a very high collision if you decide to remove that space, right? Because that could be 12261 or it could be 12261, right?
Right.
You've lost that nuance because there is meaning in that number.
So that's...
And some of your variance on collision rate could be very high based on what some assessors have decided that you have no control over.
Yeah, and that speaks to, sorry, Mark.
No, please.
No, and so we've done that kind of several different iterations way back. My company, Zillow and CoreLogic, did a kind of a test case with some Georgia counties, just sort of the initial proof. Then we kind of expanded the geography. And the one that's quoted, that 99.8%, that was CoreLogic and ICE doing that at a national level.
Independently.
Yeah, independently. And so right now what we have is two different companies that have looked at it from a uniqueness standpoint, but haven't looked at it from a universality standpoint. Yeah. And that's where those two things really butt up against each other, because your point, if you remove some of that formatting, you're going to create duplication. Yeah. And it might be a small percentage nationally, but a high percentage in a particular county. Yeah. But if you don't do that, you may reduce your duplicity, but you may decrease your match rate. And so that's really where we're trying to figure that out. Yeah. And we looked at it at a county level, and kind of like to your point, if you took that number of duplicated records and looked at it, aggregately per county, there's about 30 counties that are just awful.
Yeah, that seems like it could be a chance.
It seems like it, but the evidence that we've got, the data that we have, doesn't really support it, that from a national perspective.
Right, and in aggregate, it disappears. But
but to your point, we did identify about 20 or so counties out of the 3,100 counties. 20 of them are the ones that have this issue, right? So they're the problem children in the group. And so one thing that we've been talking about in the work group is maybe what we do is we say how to treat these counties. Like, here's the rules. Do you have a county on this list? No. Okay, do it this way. If you have a county on this list, then look, we got to let's talk about
You have
it.
to
You know?
use the M and the L to
Yeah.
use the separate.
Exactly.
And that's
because
what I was
you lose
mentioning
meaning on the
earlier,
rest.
like with the metadata, because, I mean, it's random county, but I think Greenville, South Carolina, the data in and of itself, even with formatting, is not unique. So they'll have an issue where there may be a parcel that every condo on that parcel has the same number. But you know that the assessor is getting the tax bill to the person. How they're doing it, really, that's their problem. But for us, because we need to maintain uniqueness too, we're taking the parcel ID and shoving the account number on the end of it.
Yeah.
And so each one of those are unique. That works well for us, but another company might be taking the parcel ID and adding the land parcel ID to it.
Right.
And so it's those kind of variations where uniqueness in and of itself is not much of a goal, because you really want to drive for that high match rate. And, you know, like Mark was saying, from a market standpoint, maybe a little more tangible example is if I've got a warehouse of deed images for property transfer, for mortgages, et cetera, and I want people to make an API call to me to buy those images, I want them to hit the right property every time, because otherwise...
Uniqueness is not a goal, but it's very important to be extremely close as you can be, because people are going to build things assuming that.
Right.
Right.
The uniqueness is, no one's saying that uniqueness is not important. We know uniqueness is important. And I think that our point here is that it's one check, it's one level.
Yeah.
And if it's not unique inside of a county, which is what we're seeing, then at least we can focus efforts on how to determine what something deterministic for that county, we can do it. Like that's a doable, like 20 outliers of these counties, that's a manageable thing in a spec. Right? If it was 1,000 counties or 10,000 counties, or well, I guess it only can go up to
That'd
3.
be more than all the counties, but that would be a
that'd
problem.
that'd be a real big problem. That's really duplication. But if we had like 1,000 counties, that's okay. That's not really manageable. 20, that's probably manageable.
Yeah, I mean, the hard part is delimiters are hard. You're calling out space here, but it could be anything. Next week, someone decides that colon is the right delimiter they want to use, and now this whole thing kind of, or dash, you already have the dash issue, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah, but we had that point. I think that it still should not. I'm not trivializing it at all. A little. I'm not mean to be, but 0.02%. That's a pretty good match rate. I would
yeah,
almost.
I completely agree with that. But
Yeah.
again, if you have wild outliers, again, have a means to make the exceptions for them, or rules on how to handle those wild outliers. For sure.
And for full disclosure, so what CoreLogic did is they said, hey, listen, what we're going to do is we're going to rerun the whole set, and that's what I kind of alluded to that here, where we just take the dashes in as is, right? We'll just like, hey, whatever, they put dashes in, fine. There's a problem associated with that Matt brought up, a challenge. It's another
It's
challenge.
hard
It's
to parse
associated
it
with
back out,
that. Yeah, because is it that way in the data? Is it going to change a little? You know, what's really the point? Why did that happen? So, but by just doing that, you're down to 10,000 properties that really. So just by doing that one thing, you can fix about 30,000 of these records out of
Yeah, I guess
156
who should
million.
be the source of truth to know that those 10,000 properties need a slight variation?
You still got 10,000 at the end. It's like, well, what's going on there? I would make the argument that at that level, these could even be just data problems in the county. I know the government probably does work so perfectly pristine that there's no data problems ever. But I mean, let's face it, that could be what's going on, which is why we need to look at those counties. This is the current work in the work group. Look at those counties, find out what's going on. Matt's already been handling that anyway. So that's really what we're up against now. Is like, let's try to be smart about what the solution is.
Sure.
So I really kind of skipped on the hashing part. I don't know where we're at with time.
I got one more question, and
Oh,
So,
Bill.
Hit the bar.
of course, you guys are talking about assessment data, and that's kind of the source of truth. But what about MLS data? I know I've dealt where MLSs are on top of each other on the exact same listing, and that parcel ID is different. With dashes, one does not have dashes. So that's going to be an issue because it's not consistent on input.
right, and that's where, of course, it's hard to have a backward-facing solution. In an ideal world, those two MLSs would have, it could have been wildly different data providers, but if we had that UPI in place and they use AutoPop, then they would have had the same parcel ID. As far as fixing historical listings with mismatched parcel IDs, I'll defer to Mark.
thanks.
And we're out of time.
Yeah, and with that,
We actually
we're out
are
of
coming
time
up
here.
on time. So I would encourage you all to go to upi.reso.org. also go to Confluence, see the discussion, see the CoreLogic research that was the most recent done that talks about all the characters they found inside of APNs. It's wild, but it's government work, so that's what you find there. And so really get deep into that research, because these guys have obviously been doing that in these meetings for months, recently, but years at that point. So I'll let you guys close out, and then we'll do final comments on what's coming next.
Yeah, I think, my closeout would be, I really appreciate everyone sticking around for the session. I know it's late in the day, and I really appreciate everyone that had questions or comments. The benefit of asking that question and comment is we're going to use some AI to figure out who you are and expect you to be at the next meeting. So hopefully you'll be there.
On that note, our meetings are every fourth Wednesday at noon Pacific. And really, we need your voices at the meeting. And it's interesting because you can tell now that there's a lot of movement towards serious adoption, and that's why we're getting a lot more voices inside the work group. So that's why these changes are happening. And the more voices, I know that they say, too many cooks. We need more cooks, okay? We need to hear the voices. We need to know what the right spices are, right?
Right, and I think, not to overstate it, but especially given it's a volunteer group, we've had more interaction in the last 2 months than we've had in a long time. So I feel like we're at a point where we can make some good decisions, get some adoption, and this will seem like a way to put it, and really negate the need for the group moving forward. Or if we don't, we're going to be in this continual loop of, I don't know, what do you think?
Exactly. Yeah, so it's an inflection point, I think, in the group. We're no longer looking at all the different ways you can do a UPI. That took years. And now we're focused on when we have a really good solution, and we're tweaking it because it's very important that it works. That's what we want to make sure we have. I think we're done. Sam?